and you're under arrest on suspicion of murder. You don't have anything but obey how in defence don't mention when questioned something for court.
What do you mean?
Anything you do say no given evidence.
Imagine enjoying a sunny day at a serene coastal beach, only to stumble upon something that would forever haunt your memories. A horrific discovery that would unravel the twisted story of deceit, brutality, and desperation. This is the chilling case of Simon Sean, a man who became the victim of an unimaginable crime, leading investigators to a pair of accomplices hiding a dark secret. Before we dive into this gripping case, don't forget to subscribe for more thought-provoking and true crime stories. Your support helps us uncover more mysteries like this one. Simon Sean, a 43-year-old local in Bournemouth, England, had a troubled life marked by challenges and resilience. A drifter with a history of substance abuse, Simon often found himself on the fringes of society. Despite his hardships, he was known to be kind and hardworking when given the opportunity, often taking temporary jobs to make ends meet. His friends and acquaintances described him as someone who had a good heart and a desire to rebuild his life, despite the overwhelming challenges he faced. However, Simon's life took a darker turn when his struggles with addiction deepened. Once a promising man with dreams of stability, he became entangled with dangerous individuals who exploited his vulnerabilities. He had recently served time for drug-related offenses and was trying to rebuild his life when tragedy struck. Living in a cycle of relapse and recovery, Simon often found solace in fleeting relationships, none of which were stable enough to give him the footing he needed. Despite being a victim of his own addictions, Simon wasn't a bad person. He had aspirations of turning his life around, but he couldn't escape the grip of his past. His encounters with those who used him for their own gain ultimately led to his untimely death. On August 26, 2023, Bournemouth's tranquil Bosun Beach turned into the site of a macabre discovery. Two wrapped bundles tumbled down a cliff near a tourist enjoying the summer sun. The woman's curiosity quickly turned to horror as she unwrapped one of the bundles, only to be met with the unmistakable stench of decay and the sight of human remains, severed legs. Her heart raced as she immediately called the police, fearing the worst. The discovery of these dismembered limbs sent shockwaves through the local community. Police arrived promptly at the scene, and forensic teams were called in to investigate the remains. The legs were carefully examined, and forensic specialists confirmed the body parts belonged to Simon Sean. It was clear that this was no accident. Simon had met a gruesome end. The search for the remaining parts of Simon's body intensified as the police worked tirelessly to uncover more pieces of the puzzle. Investigators quickly focused on tracing his last known whereabouts, hoping to piece together the events that led to his brutal murder. This was no ordinary crime, and it appeared to have been carefully planned out by those closest to him. As detectives dug into Simon's past, they discovered he had a history of transient living and addiction. He was a drifter who often squatted in rundown locations and relied on temporary work to survive. Before his death, Simon was last seen at a dilapidated hotel, but he had reportedly moved to a new address on Aylesbury Road. This clue, combined with forensic analysis, pointed investigators in the direction of the gritty underbelly of Bournemouth, where Simon had most recently been living with two individuals who would soon become the focus of the investigation: Debbie Pereira and Benjamin Atkins. The search for Simon's remaining body parts was relentless. Investigators worked tirelessly, hoping to recover any trace of Simon that would provide them with answers. A breakthrough came when they discovered that Simon's mobile phone had been sold at a local pawn shop shortly after his death. Surveillance footage from the shop identified a woman, Debbie Pereira, selling the phone with a man, Benjamin Atkins, lurking nearby. The discovery of the pawned phone was a pivotal moment in the investigation, leading detectives straight to the suspects. Debbie Pereira and Benjamin Atkins quickly emerged as the prime suspects in Simon Sean's murder. The couple had a history of substance abuse and criminal behavior, and their shared address on Aylesbury Road made it clear that Simon had stayed with them before his tragic death. The couple's involvement in Simon's demise became undeniable once police reviewed the evidence they had gathered. Both Debbie and Benjamin had difficult and troubled pasts. Debbie's childhood was marked by abuse. which led to a long history of unhealthy relationships and drug addiction. She had struggled with heroin addiction for years and had been involved in several abusive relationships. Despite her difficult upbringing and personal struggles, Debbie had 2 children, aged 16 and 19 at the time of Simon's murder. However, her addiction and criminal behavior had distanced her from her children, and she had little contact with them. Benjamin, too, was no stranger to hardship. He had a troubled youth, with a violent stepfather, and the loss of his supportive grandmother. These formative experiences pushed him toward drugs and crime, particularly during the rave scene of the 90s. His life became a constant oscillation between attempts at rehabilitation and relapsing back into his old ways, which only deepened his criminal lifestyle. Eventually, Benjamin relocated to Bournemouth, hoping for a fresh start. However, his past quickly caught up with him, and he fell back into the destructive patterns that had defined his life. Together, Benjamin and Debbie formed a toxic and volatile pair, enabling each other's worst tendencies. Their relationship was one of codependency, marked by drug use, theft, and violence. They lived in a small, decrepit flat in Bournemouth, and their home became a hub for illicit activities. This is where Simon Sean crossed paths with them, seeking shelter from the harshness of life, only to find himself trapped in a deadly situation. Simon's path crossed with Benjamin and Debbie when he found himself homeless and struggling to survive. Given his background with addiction, Simon often found himself in and out of dangerous situations. When he encountered Benjamin and Debbie, they offered him a place to stay, a tent in their garden. This gesture of apparent kindness, however, came at a steep price. In exchange for shelter, Simon was forced to pay £40 worth of drugs each day. This arrangement quickly turned exploitative and toxic, and it didn't take long for tensions to rise. Simon, already dealing with his own demons, began to feel trapped in an environment that seemed to offer no escape. The couple's manipulation and exploitation of Simon worsened his mental state, and it soon became clear that he was no longer welcome in their home. The atmosphere in the flat grew more hostile, and the threats of violence escalated. In the days leading up to Simon's death, Benjamin began accusing Simon of stealing money from him. On the evening of August 17, 2023, Simon found himself in a volatile confrontation with Benjamin. He was accused of stealing £30, about $40 worth of drugs, and the situation quickly escalated. Benjamin, high on drugs and enraged by the accusation, confronted Simon. Simon, weakened by his addiction and the tension in the flat, tried to defend himself, but he was no match for Benjamin's strength and aggression. The altercation soon turned physical, with Benjamin escalating the violence. Debbie, also under the influence, retreated to the bedroom, leaving the 2 men to fight. The violence escalated rapidly, and soon Benjamin had brought a knife into the confrontation. It's unclear whether Simon or Benjamin first produced the weapon, but what followed was a vicious and bloody assault. Simon sustained multiple stab wounds, and his defensive wounds indicated that he tried desperately to protect himself. The attack was so brutal that the walls of the utility room were splattered with blood. When Simon collapsed, Benjamin didn't stop. He gouged out Simon's eyes before using a portable speaker to strike him over the head, ultimately ending Simon's life in a senseless and brutal act. After Simon's death, Benjamin and Debbie immediately set to work covering their tracks. They sold his phone at a local pawn shop, and Benjamin was seen buying a hacksaw. The dismemberment began shortly after, with Benjamin carefully severing Simon's body in the utility room. He used an anatomy book to guide his crude and hasty cuts, influenced by his drug use but methodical in his attempts to conceal the crime. The dismemberment was brutal but effective enough to hide the evidence. Debbie, though not physically involved in the murder itself, played a significant role in the cover-up. She assisted Benjamin in cleaning the blood-soaked room, disposing of Simon's remains, and concealing the gruesome crime. Both were intent on hiding the evidence and hoping that the brutality of their actions would remain hidden. Despite their best efforts, however, parts of Simon's body began to surface in the following days. On August 26, 2023, a local officer was drawn to a foul smell coming from Bosom Chine Gardens. Following the scent, the officer discovered a black suitcase containing Simon's torso. This was the first major breakthrough in the case, confirming the brutal nature of Simon's death. DNA analysis quickly linked the remains to Simon, and investigators knew they were on the right track. More parts of Simon's body were discovered in the following weeks, including skull fragments in Walpole Lane. On September 1, 2023, following the evidence from the pawn shop and the discovery of the dismembered body parts, Benjamin and Debbie were arrested. The arrests were captured on police body cam footage, and both individuals were charged with the murder of Simon Sean. During their interviews, their stories began to unravel. Benjamin initially claimed he had acted in self-defense, but the overwhelming evidence, including Simon's defensive wounds and the brutality of the attack, contradicted this claim. Eventually, both Benjamin and Debbie confessed to their involvement in the crime, with Benjamin admitting to the murder, though he tried to justify it as an act of self-preservation in the heat of an argument. The trial of Benjamin Atkins and Debbie Pereira began in May 2024. Despite the overwhelming evidence against them, both defendants showed little remorse for their actions. Benjamin, in particular, seemed almost proud of the crime he had committed. He made chilling comments during his trial, even claiming that he would do it again if given the chance, a statement that sent shivers down the spines of those in the courtroom. Debbie, on the other hand, was less vocal, but seemed to show no significant emotional regret for the role she had played in Simon's death and the subsequent cover-up. The court proceedings were deeply emotional for Simon's family, especially for his son Wesley, who delivered a powerful victim impact statement. Wesley spoke of his father's struggles with addiction, but also highlighted the warmth and kindness Simon had shown to those around him. He expressed his grief over losing a father who, despite his flaws, had always tried to do better for himself and for his family. In the end, Benjamin Atkins was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 19 years for his role in Simon's murder. The judge noted the brutal and callous nature of his actions, particularly the dismemberment of the body. Debbie Pereira was sentenced to 4 years for her role in perverting the course of justice and preventing the burial of a corpse. The judge emphasized that had Debbie called the police immediately after the violence, Simon's death might have been prevented. Her failure to act was a crucial factor in the severity of her sentence. While justice was served, the loss of Simon Sean left a deep and lasting void in the lives of his family and friends. His death was senseless and tragic, and his children, especially Wesley, were left to grapple with the painful reality that they would never see their father again. Despite the difficult circumstances of his life, Simon's death marked the end of a potential for redemption that was extinguished too soon. His children were left with memories of a father who had fought against his demons, only to be betrayed by those he had hoped would offer him support. The case also serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of addiction and how it can lead individuals down dark and dangerous paths. Simon's life had been marked by struggles with substance abuse, but it was his vulnerability, being exploited by those who pretended to care, that ultimately led to his death. His tragic story sheds light on how addiction not only destroys the lives of those who suffer from it, but also the lives of those who come into contact with them, often in the most damaging of ways. In the wake of Simon's death, his family began the slow and painful process of healing. His son Wesley expressed his desire to ensure his father's legacy was remembered not for the circumstances of his death, but for the moments of kindness and love he had shared with those around him. Wesley, despite the trauma and grief, vowed to help others who might be facing similar struggles, hoping that by sharing his father's story, he could bring awareness to the devastating impacts of addiction and the consequences of exploitation. This case is one of cruelty, addiction, and senseless violence. Simon Sean's story is tragic, but it is also a sobering reminder of how addiction can destroy lives and how vulnerability can lead to exploitation. Simon, a man who sought to rebuild his life after facing countless challenges, was ultimately let down by those he trusted. His story highlights the importance of compassion, understanding, and the need for support systems that can guide individuals out of destructive cycles. As we reflect on Simon's life and his death, we are reminded of the fragility of human existence and the devastating consequences of unchecked anger, addiction, and betrayal. It's a stark reminder that sometimes those who are most in need of help are the ones who are least able to escape the dangerous situations they find themselves in. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us continue to tell stories like Simon's, shedding light on the darker corners of our world. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.